Item slots. You know them, you love them, you probably don't think much about them. They're that magical place that all the weapons you're actually ever going to use will be. The same place that your 12 extra copies of the third degree will never get to go to. But is an item slot just a place to store your active loadout? Yes, that is tangibly and literally what it is. But what about philosophically? Because philosophically, item slots also play a role in showcasing how a character had evolved and give us insight into Valve's design process as a whole. For example, almost all of the utility items in TF2 ended up in the secondary slot. The sandwich, the sodas, the banners all ended up towards the secondary slots, even though in TF2's infancy, there's really no reason that absolutely had to be the case. Now, what does that tell us about TF2's development? I don't fucking know, I'm here to vague post, dude. The primary slot, conversely, always ended up with weapons that mirrored stock very closely, like how all of Soldier's primaries, no matter how weird they get, are just rocket launchers at the end of the day, to help maintain his character identity, as they did with everyone. The only exceptions, of course, being Spy's revolver, that's actually just a venomous snake he throws at you, and the booties, and I guess maybe the crossbow while we're here? Some of these slots were used to nearly the greatest of their potential, being Eiffel-towered and stuffed with a great list of weapons that advanced their respective owner's character design. The best example, I think, is, again, Soldier's primary slot. All of Soldier's primaries are great. They maintain his core design, which is good both for the user and his victims, since almost all of the fundamental skills you learn related to the rocket launcher also apply to its different variations, while simultaneously exploring some really fun and creative designs that do cool shit with the same basic concept, or provided Soldier with something that the player base wanted, like the rocket jumper, letting those grotesque jump map fans fly around to their heart's content on casual servers. But not every slot can be so prestigious. Despite Valve's best efforts to print over 150 unique weapon functions in Team Fortress 2, some slots just didn't get anything to fulfill the potential they had for great designs, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to bring up 5, or maybe 4 or 6, depending on how long the video gets, of the worst entire weapon slots in TF2 that could have been so much and ended up being so little. Before we start, remember to subscribe so that you can be entered into my giveaway where one lucky fan gets to have the bottled tornado I got from Texas, and make sure to check out Infinity Hexodome Tactics, which releases on September 10th and which you can and should wishlist on Steam now. Now, some of my more wizened viewers might be going, wait, Infinity, like the tabletop game? Yes, but imagine, instead of playing Infinity on a tabletop, you were playing it on top of the tiny little memory chips that make up the hyperinflated SSDs you have in your computer. Infinity Hexodome Tactics is, startlingly, a hex-based strategy game, and the dome part, of course, comes in because we all exist under the firmament. The game is a lot like the newer generation of XCOM games, if you want a very close analogy, except in this game, your allies actually hit things. Unlike a lot of other turn-based strategy games, and also a lot of tabletop games, Hexodome isn't about, like, tabling your opponent. It's not just about killing all their dudes. It's much more important to take control of the objective. That's how you actually win. So repositioning or slowing down your enemies or just keeping them from getting into the circle is just as important as dealing a lot of damage. And because we're not just focused on dealing the most damage and keeping ourselves alive, your turns are really spent thinking about how you're going to keep your opponents from getting access to the ring, gathering resources, maintaining your pressure on the objective, and preparing just in case for the next one. To this end, you can make some pretty cool plays happen. Like this one time, I was able to push an enemy outside of the objective, which is great because then they lose a little bit of control, and into the overwatch radius of another one of my characters, not only getting them away from the point, but also dealing a ton of damage. And I did that intentionally. It definitely wasn't a happy accident. The game is genuinely a lot of fun, and I mean that. If you want to try it out now, there's a tournament build of the game that you can access through the community Discord. You'll find links to that Discord and to the Steam page so you can wishlist the game before its release on September 10th in the description of this video. First up, we have a pretty standard and well-known, I would say even commonly agreed upon slot, Spy's fourth weapon slot, the sappers. The sapper as a design is simultaneously a clever solution to a problem from the previous game, and one of the most absolutely droll, boring, and one-dimensional weapons in the entire game. The sapper exists very simply because in TFC, Spy had a pretty obnoxious and awkward relationship with Engineer. No, not like that. In that game, he had no such anti-sentry tool, so he was very awkwardly unable to deal with the automated defenses which he would end up surrounding himself with because he was the guy whose design dictated that he should try to sneak into the backline. You know, where all the sentries would be placed. Now, he did also struggle because TFC is a godforsaken hellscape where everyone has 10 bombs and 60% of the gameplay is endless grenade spam, with the front line turning into an incessant field of constant explosions, but that's another issue for another time. If you want to learn more, I actually covered this already in another video. The sapper, obviously, gives the spy a way to deal with sentries and other buildings without breaking his own cover, at least to the sentry, meaning he can much more realistically navigate enemy territory without getting stonewalled by the very defenses he's supposed to be infiltrating. It's a good solution to a problem, but that's all it ever really achieves. As a weapon, the sapper is one of the narrowest, least useful in the entire game. This is what you call a parasitic design, a term coined by MTG designer Mark Rosewater to describe a design that has to piggyback off of another design to do things, as opposed to functions that have a wider, more universal impact. The sapper is a pretty good example of a highly parasitic design because it does nothing at all without buildings. It exists entirely within their shadow. It's not really what sappers are that I have an issue with. It's more so the slow erosion of our rights of privacy and ownership that concern me, but also I think what we're missing out on is what sappers aren't. I think it would have been really cool if, somehow, Valve found a way to lean more into the gadgetry side of Spy's design. I do love what we have now. I think Spy is one of the most fascinating characters in any shooter, even if I'm not good at all of the cool things he can do. The picking off enemies and manipulating other players' movement stuff is really cool, but I think it would have also been quite interesting to play around with him and what he can do. The only argument against this concept that I can think of, beyond of course the fact that it's never going to happen because Valve tied all of the TF2 devs to that rocket and splattered them across the surface of the moon, is that as one of Spy's teammates, you probably expect him to be able to sap a sentry all the time. You might even be relying upon it.
Yeah!
It's not really sapping if you shake this sentry for me. And explaining what tool the spy has equipped without having them call it out would be mildly inconvenient. Like, yeah, you could model it on the spy, but spies aren't really trying to spend time around their teammates necessarily. They're trying to do the opposite, actually. And then you'd have to ask the spy to stop moving so you could see what it is. When they're not trying to do that, they should be out going and doing things, blah, blah, blah. Even still, if this slot absolutely had to remain as a sentry disruption tool, I think we could have pushed the envelope further than this. Yes, the red tape recorder. Look, I'm friends with Cyber Wizard.
Okay, still going, still going.
Nice. I thought I was gonna be dead. I was half expecting to be dead.
Gave me
Oh my
$5 and he told me to tell you what shit is.
You're gonna
Here, I'll
sell
give-
out your honor for $5?
Here, you know what, I'll do it in like a riddle form.
Yikes.
I'll
close
do
your
it in a
eyes.
riddle. All right. Where on? I'm on a bridge.
No fucking way. Cyber.
Oh,
You're an asshole, Cyber!
Yeah.
You're an asshole!
It's an on
Why are you
cheating.
so desperate to sabotage yourself?
I would never do
comps,
that
the
to
comps.
Wet Show.
Who is the patron saint of the Red Tape Recorder Church, and if he knew how to hurt people, he would hurt me for saying this, but this weapon, whether it's useful or not, is very uninspired. The differences between it and the stock sapper are extremely limited and niche. The three most important are that it can kill sentries very fast if they've just been built, and it technically takes so long to kill a leveled sentry that it locks the engineer out of using his sentry slot for a significant amount of time if he can't desap it, meaning that it prevents the engineer from destroying his sentry and building another, and by that nature, it also just takes a really long time to sap a sentry, even compared to the already glacial rate a sapper has. Outside of that, they are nearly identical, and for a slot that exists as such an open-ended question, what if Spy had a tool to disrupt enemy buildings, or even wider, the enemy team? That's a shame. I imagine this slot never really got any significant experimental unlocks because of what Robin Walker, the guy who made Team Fortress TF2 and worked as TF2's lead designer from 2007 to 2014, who also got vac banned yesterday for some reason, calls dynamic range. Dynamic range is similar to another concept you may have heard of if you're a fucking nerd, known as design space. Both of these terms basically refer to the total amount of experimentation a mechanic or a thing within your game has. For example, example, a power-up in Mario has a very wide design space. As long as it helps, or sometimes hinders, the player deal with enemies, manage the symptoms of Mario's type 1 diabetes, or jump around and navigate the space, it's probably a fairly valid design. Dynamic range has a very slight implicit difference in my opinion though. Design space is far more liberal, describing the absolute limits of a design's possibilities. In TF2, the team was very clearly cautious about making designs that strayed too far away from the base of what a slot's default weapon could do. Again, you see this very clearly with most primaries. Most primaries in the game mirror their stock counterpart in a very significant way, as do most melee weapons as well to a lesser degree. I think this was smart, because the further you stray away from the core concept of a character's design, the less that character's design exists, and the muddier the roles each class has, which probably isn't a good idea for a class shooter, or really any character-based game. TF2 never went overboard in this degree because of the intelligent decision to be reserved by the devs, but you see little inklings that push towards that result. Like when Scout and Heavy each got the ability to heal their allies, which in vanilla TF2 was exclusively reserved for Medic and Engineer. Now, of course, the Sandwich and the Mad Milk do not get these two characters anywhere near the level of Medic. Anyone who says that they have parity is an absolute fucking poser. But this is what could happen if you were to take things too far, which they didn't. Dynamic range explains this. It specifies the design space within the restriction of not escaping the gravity of your core concept, and the Sapper has what you would call a limited dynamic range. If you're sticking to the fundamental base, there's only so much you can do, so many knobs you can turn related to its DPS or Sapper health, because having health and doing damage to the sentry and, disabling it is all it does. This is, however, exactly where experimentation works best. There are examples of the team being willing to try something very divergent and unique, like Demo Knight, Demo Delivery Man, Demo Surgeon, the Ooze, the Banners, the Huntsman, so on and so forth. And something similar could have done wonders here. In his discussion on this topic from a 2011 interview, Robin discusses another character with another weapon slot that he says gave the team trouble when designing unlocks because of how limited his dynamic range was. Heavy. Specifically Heavy's primaries. And I'm not shocked that the team struggled to create new primaries for Heavy that still subscribed to the same mechanics that the minigun had, while simultaneously really in any way reinventing or exploring parts of his design. The minigun is, after all, something of a trapped design. The weapon is or can be extremely potent, and therefore is counterbalanced by the fact that Heavy has to ramp up with it. Gameplay-wise, this is mostly okay. In fact, the downsides of his primaries and his base speed make Heavy one of the less effective classes, or at least one of the less versatile classes once you start getting into the higher levels of skill, simply because he can't move the way other classes do and struggles against very simple things like corner peeking. But from a design perspective, you have almost nowhere to go without dismantling the idea of the minigun itself. You've got a very powerful weapon reined in by very destructive downsides. If you disrupt either side of this delicate balance, you end up with either a useless weapon that's not powerful enough for just how sluggish Heavy becomes to use it, or you have a weapon that's too strong compared to the compensation. Even now, you can see the remnants of how the team struggled to find a place for new weapons in this dynamic. Some miniguns are just not good, none of them are really all that creative or very unique compared to stock and Tomislav, I guess. Like for example the Hulong Heater, which is neither good nor creative. And some weapons historically shattered this design and had to be remedied at blazing speeds, at least for Valve, like the launch Tomislav, which revved up so fast, you basically weren't even playing Heavy anymore. Regardless of their power, one thing is certain for every minigun. They're boring. Not just because it's the stare at people gun, but it's also the stare at people gun that prevents you from moving. If you want to make a good FPS game, there is a foundational trifecta that you need to accomplish. As long as it's fun to aim, move, and position yourself, you probably have a pretty good game, even if it's very simple. I mean, take a look at, like, Scout, for instance. Scout is a very basic character. He's fast, and he has a gun. That's it. There's no extraneous mechanics or other nonsense to complicate his design. This is the whole package. And Scout is fun because he ticks all three boxes. Scout is fast and he's frail, and this is what makes him so much fun. Because you're up in the gills of the enemy and you have like no health and you rely upon your movement, if you're not moving well, you'll die. You're dead. If you're not killing people efficiently and the fight is dragging on for too long, you'll die. If you position yourself poorly and you can't take advantage of your movement, you'll die. He's a great example of how you don't have to have a lot going on to have a lot going on, if you know what I mean. And the minigun is really easy objectively to aim. It is basically the same thing as the shotguns that are other characters' primaries like Engineer or Scout, except it shoots a lot faster, so you get more chances to hit people, so it's easier. It's hit scan, so it's easier to hit people with, especially at range, than something like the grenade launcher or the rocket launcher. And unlike, you know, the revolver or the sniper rifle, it doesn't have to worry about headshots, and it shoots multiple tracers at once, so you're probably going to be able to hit at least a couple of them, even if you're not being 100% accurate. Heavy players seem to get a little bit defensive whenever I criticize this character for being easy, but this part of Heavy is pretty objectively easier than other characters. So that's one pillar of the triangle already eliminated. Secondly, it's not like you're doing any movement with the minigun, because A, it's heavy, B, it's revved up heavy. So that's a second pillar sunk, and we're already running out of things you can really play with as a designer. And again, the problem is, this is Heavy's character design. It's not like you can just re-add these things that were specifically removed or limited for him and still have his design at the end of it. You can't just make fast Heavy. The point of Heavy is to be slow. When your weapon design is built to partially trivialize one major part of the game and heavily restrict another, what can you really do with it? The answer isn't much, and you can see this in a lot of Heavy's unlocks. They're really not that interesting. We have like the minigun but slower, the slightly faster minigun that deals a bit less DPS, the fire minigun that does pretty much absolutely nothing, and then the awful miserable minigun that never should have been included because all it achieves is making everything about Heavy slower. Your opponents move slower because it's the Natasha, they die slower because of its damage penalties, and you die a little bit slower because of its resistances. It's the same exact gameplay, but everything takes longer, and the people on the other end of it are having less fun. It's all kind of bad, and at the very least, even if you like one of these weapons, you have to admit, it's all kind of the same. And of course, again, that's part of the point, but even for other characters whose weapons are largely the same in many ways as stock, they still get a lot more variety out of their different unlocks. Even like Spy, whose revolver isn't supposed to be a primary in the first place, it's actually classified as a secondary, has some pretty good divergence between his different revolvers. There's a couple of other factors that are working against the minigun as well. For one thing, the minigun is really weirdly good at hitting people at a long range. So significant on-hit effects kinda can't really be a part of the weapon design because TF2, outside of Sniper, is a short-ranged game. There's mechanics like random spread and damage fall-off that keep you from being effective at longer ranges. The design is just kind of choked of any ability to do stuff. I think what Heavy really needed, outside of just not designing the minigun like this in the first place, but it's a bit late for that, was his own Huntsman. A weapon that is very different from the designs he started off with, if only for the sake of doing so, with very little shared mechanics between them. What exactly it would have done will always be a mystery to us, but I think this is the one thing that Heavy really needed. The only slot of his that ever really went anywhere was his melee slot, and that's like, kind of. It's not exactly hard to make melees that are better than stock TF2 melee, because stock TF2 melee is pretty much nothing. The sandwich is great as well, but that concept doesn't have a lot of legroom beyond the sandwich itself. Like we have the sandwich, the faster sandwich, the melee sandwich, which nobody uses, and the max health sandwich. Outside of that, it was just one shotgun variant, and that's all they ever really did with Heavy secondaries. You could probably put them on this list, arguably, but I think the sandwich kind of prevents that from happening. Now, while Heavy's primaries are a victim of the general game design philosophy for the entire game, there are other slots that are kind of the opposite. Sniper's secondaries, for instance, are victims of trying to escape from the original idea in the worst way imaginable, and then tripling down on that idea for some godforsaken reason. The SMG is a totally okay, fine, unexciting weapon that serves a specific purpose, just like the syringe gun. It gives a character who is supposed to be weak in a close-ranged 1v1 the slimmest hope of victory against a lower skilled or weak opponent. This was perfectly good enough, and honestly, I think more of Sniper's secondaries should have been SMGs. There was room to do something cool with like a closer range sniper. Instead though, the geniuses at Valve decided what Sniper really needed were 3 separate dogshit backpacks that have spent their entire history being extremely flat matchup hosers that have made Sniper unnecessarily annoying. Genius! If you're a veteran player, you might have noticed having watched this video that I'm not really a person, I'm actually a shadowy apparition, and that we've been discussing a lot of characters that have one thing in common. They're kind of the one-trick ponies of TF2. Sniper, Spy, and Heavy all basically do the one thing. Spy's one thing is very deep, of course, don't get me wrong, but all 3 of these characters have one job and pretty much one playstyle, and no gun Spy and shotgun Heavy don't count. that's just the regular character, but you're deciding to actually try to use one of the weapons you never focus on. This is pretty understandable because while we're on the topic of characters who missed out on their potential in one way or another, that probably involves the ones who never really got to stretch their legs and try things. And that fits Sniper very well because his secondary slot is filled with more pointless, awful backpacks than it is with SMGs that actually exist with a purpose. Even the one unlockable SMG that he's got, the Cleaners, while itself is dogshit, is far more cohesive with other weapons and his general idea than any of the backpacks are. This is not going to be a surprise to anybody who's big on TF2 content, but the backpacks are pretty infamous for not really evolving or advancing Sniper's concept in any way, nor do they actually provide anything useful for the game. All they do is make it so certain other characters don't have mechanics specifically against Sniper, and they're not even particularly good at it on their own. The Razorback doesn't actually stop a spy from killing you, and the Darwins, which used to be even worse somehow, doesn't actually stop pyros from harassing you. It just makes it more difficult for them. It's not even like a weapon that you use, it's just a passive effect too, so you can't like do anything with this. And again, these don't have synergy with any of Sniper's other weapons, partially because Sniper is a really, really strict one-trick pony. And when they weren't busy doing this, they were busy making the Girardi, one of the worst weapon designs in the game. And since we're already here, let's move on to Sniper's melee weapons. Sniper's melee slot isn't as bad as the secondaries are, but there isn't much here, and that's really not much to say. Again, I think this slot wasn't really used to do much because the developers are pinned to the core design of Sniper, and the core design for Sniper is that he's not really supposed to be that competent in close ranges, especially not with melee weapons. Like with the SMG, you get a little bit of leeway to work with. He shouldn't be completely useless, but if a Sniper is having to resort to melee weapons, he should probably lose. And again, Sniper does this one thing, and he's already really good at doing that one thing. He doesn't need any help from any other slot to do what the sniper rifle is capable of doing. With, say, a character like Soldier, all of his weapon slots either were made to work in concert or already worked very well and synergized with the other weapon slots he had. The shotgun synergizes very well with the rocket launcher. It gives you a fallback weapon for when you're out of ammo, considering the rocket launcher is a multi-use thing that's going to cost you a lot of your ammo to do all the jumping and killing that you expect to do, and doesn't come with many rockets to begin with. And then with additions like the gunboats or the Market Gardener, they helped play into his gameplay. Sniper doesn't really care what his secondary or melee actually do, unless you make them do something crazy, because the sniper rifle doesn't need any help from anybody to achieve its goals. It's a very centralized and complete weapon. It's not like he needs any kind of a real utility melee, for instance, because he doesn't need any utility to do the thing he's trying to do. All he has to do is find a good spot and click heads. That's why they were so desperate to find something to give him that they ended up with designs like the Razorback. So for the melee slot, he shouldn't have melee weapons that are good at killing people, because he shouldn't be good at that. You can't really give him any utility because there's nothing he really wants. The last super category you would be left with would be like a movement melee. But again, Sniper is not supposed to be fast, A, and also he's very extremely sensitive to positioning. Any speed boost or extra height he's granted could unlock unforeseen and evil sightlines we don't even know exist yet. And I think this is why all the kukris we got are very uninspired. We have like the bleed version of stock, just like the Southern Hospitality. I think they thought that this was going to be a lot better against spies than it really was. As it turns out, even if the bleed helps you find a cloaked spy, you know, if you're running at him with a fucking tribalman ship, he's probably gonna shoot you. We have things like the Shahan Shaha, which is a really weird, sometimes kind of useful in certain cases against light classes, sometimes if you shoot them with a body shot first, but is otherwise either useless or just really boring. Like when you get to the point where your idea for a weapon is it's the same as stock, but in some very specific circumstances it's doing more damage, you're really scraping your fingers through the bottom of the barrel to find an idea. And then finally, of course, we have the Bushwalker, the single most overhyped junk in this game, and I'll stand by that. First off, I do agree this thing shouldn't even exist in conjunction with Girardi. Sniper should not have been given an effective melee weapon in almost any context. But also, people really act like this is a lot better than it is. Girardi Bushwalker is not only a combo that eats almost your entire loadout, which is kind of, again, okay, because Sniper doesn't care, which is a whole other issue to begin with, but the 20% damage penalty is much worse than people think. This lets, like, every character flatline this dude even faster than they already can. If you're letting a sniper run up to you with this, you either had no ammo, you got snuck up on somehow, or you're just maybe not very good at the game yet. Or maybe you've been placed into a situation where some kind of extraneous factor makes the Bushwalker Jiraiya combo more lethal than it really should be otherwise, in which case, it's not really the Bushwalker's fault. I think what Sniper could have used, maybe, and this is a big maybe, is like his own Demo Knight. And by that, I don't mean a melee-focused alternative playstyle, but instead a playstyle that kind of hammers itself into place by de-synergizing with his rifles. A weapon whose downsides, like the Eyelander's health penalty or the holster and equip speed penalties that all of the swords have, makes it somewhat more pointless to take that weapon without also swapping out to its pre-designated partner, the same way that all of the swords would really like it if you're using the shields or the booties. Something that softly but firmly directs you towards using either the entire loadout or none of it. As far as I'm aware from the seemingly endless tweets and Reddit comments and YouTube posts and smoke signals I see about the topic, Sniper is a character a lot of people have issues with, and I think a lot of arguments against him are valid. It is sort of annoying that in this game that is very specifically designed to be a close quarter sort of game, there is just one character who can shoot you from a tiny crack across the map, one-shotting people from further out than any other character has a mathematically effective weapon in the slightest. However, I do think a lot of people go way too hard on this dude. Some of the suggestions for changes, which by the way, hilarious, I see people make about Sniper, or like the nerfs that they come up with in their head, are almost cartoonish. And I think a good way to temper some of that disgust would have been to offer an alternative that people could play, which would obviously also help make him a little bit more palatable for people who don't like his particular style. I don't mind Sniper personally, I'll play him, I like playing him, but I could totally understand if somebody found him boring. You do just kind of stand around and try to click heads. Now, before somebody comments about it, because they will, Valve did test weapons that tackled this exact issue. They were testing a revolving rifle that would have functioned as like a lighter sniper rifle, probably also allowing Sniper to be more on the front lines and a bit more active. A lot of the code for this one even still just exists in the game, but for reasons we'll never know, it just didn't make the cut. And this will come up again because in our final slot, we have the king of missed chances, the Engineer's PDA. It's almost hilarious that the PDA has its own weapon slot because there are no actual weapons to put there other than the PDA. There is merely a skin for the PDA from the Fallout New Vegas crossover. This entire slot exists just for this. And that's a shame because the PDA is an entire world of untapped imagination. A building can just be anything, I suppose, as long as it's built. And the only one we ever got was the mini sentry. Now, I love the mini sentry. It's my favorite way to play Engineer by far, but there was so much more that could have been tried. Like, we have the mini sentry, but what about the macro sentry, a sentry that's 20 feet tall? Or what if Engineer could litter the map with vending machines as a part of his passive income scheme? Now, in fairness to Valve, they did test a few exploratory ideas like mini dispensers and speed pads as alternatives, obviously for dispensers and teleporters. But in fairness to us, the people who actually play the game, they never added it, so it kind of doesn't matter what they were gonna do if they didn't actually do it. The efforts are admirable, but without results, there's only so much we can appreciate. As far as character evolution goes, Engineer is a weird case. In some instances, he evolved in really interesting ways. The Widowmaker, the Frontier Justice, and the Gunslinger are some of the best additions to any character in the game, in my opinion. They took a character who struggles to keep up with his team and is often sidelined on defense and used as like a teleporter servant or a cart jockey, especially on offense, and made him like kind of fun, giving him a more agile and aggressive style, which I think is way more fun and fits TF2 a lot better than standing in a corner and smacking your sentry gun and turning around to maybe check for spies every once in a while. And then on the other hand, I have this accursed tattoo that gives me corrupting, intoxicating power, and for every good addition Engineer got, we also got the Short Circuit, the Wrangler, and the Rescue Ranger. Weapons that pretty much did nothing but reinforce his ability to hyper-turtle into a corner and smack his sentry gun. All of which very sort of obnoxiously designed to like brute force the gun's survival until a bunch of these weapons got nerfed or reworked. The big issue that I have, and I think that a lot of people who don't really love Engineer have, is just the fact that his defining mechanic is really sluggish. It's not just a matter of like move speed or having no alternatives to walking until the teleporter's up, I guess, or like sentry jumping, but more so the fact that you have to sit around and wait for your buildings to be built and then also to upgrade them. And it's not like moving them is really quick. I think that less potent but more disposable variants of the existing buildings, like the mini dispenser or the speed pads that they tested, would have been great alternatives while still closely mirroring the designs of their stock counterparts. We'll never know what horrible things happened to Valve during their playtests because Engineer was able to make a slightly faster building dispenser, which I'm sure they couldn't have just nerfed later if it had any issues, but I can't imagine it was something so bad that the very concept of new buildings altogether had to be scrapped or never revisited almost entirely. What's funny to me is that our old friend Robin Walker, in a GDC talk about updates, mentions offhand, get it because the gunslinger's on the gunslinger was just a throwaway drawing they included among a number of other concepts in the background of the Engineer update teaser, which they turned into a weapon after positive community feedback. If the sentry gun, which is Engineer's most important building, and yes it is the sentry gun, that's what allows you to hold the space so you can build the rest of your stuff, can have an unlock created for it on a whim, why can't the dispenser or the teleporter? What about producing ammo could possibly have gone so wrong? And again, much like that revolving rifle, a lot of the stuff for this is just there. It's just in the game. It's not completed or implemented, but it's there. Certainly a lot closer to being a real weapon than most concepts are. The assets are all there, the code is still partially completed. I imagine somebody who's more programmatically skilled than I am could get this working with limited effort. And again, I can't imagine what major issue this possibly could have caused. And I think it would have made facing against or having multiple engineers a little bit more interesting than it is now, because one of them could go with the alternative loadout and the other could go with the stock. Of course, having multiple engineers is very good at all times, just because cooperative engineering is nonsense. But either way, I think most people would rather have like one engineer on the speed pads and then maybe another one on the teleporters, so you have multiple ways of getting around and don't just have to sit around in queue for the telly. One guy who can protect your backline and then another who can be up with the team. And this isn't even to mention all of the things they never even did test. All of the immeasurable concepts you could have created outside of the realm of stuff that Valve actually wrote code for. Again, a building could be anything. There's very few rules outside of, I guess, that it has to be, like, upgradable, which, I mean, even the mini-sentry isn't, or that it has, like, a building time and can be healed by the wrench. There have been some community efforts to try to realize these concepts, and while those are really cool, until they're in the base game, it's kind of limited in how enjoyable they really are. They're something of a novelty, really. A very cool novelty, one that we should appreciate. But still, if it's not in the base game, you know. It would have to be a weapon so outlandishly fun, it's worth not playing the rest of TF2 for. Now, that's all 5 of our slots, so I think the only reasonable conclusion question is, did Valve fuck up? No. I think playing it relatively safe is not actually that bad. It is a little disappointing that we maybe missed out on things that could have been cool, but there's a lot of ifs in that statement. When you add something like the Razorback, there's no real going back, especially with the way that TF2 and other Valve games' item ownership works. You don't really own them, of course, but I don't think Valve would ever just take away people's items for no reason just because of a balance issue or something. So once an item is in TF2, it pretty much has to stay in TF2, more or less, especially with weapons that have a functional purpose. So even if a design is found to be problematic later down the line, you can't remove it. The only thing you can really do is nerf it into oblivion.
I was born 87 years ago.
That's not exactly what I meant, which creates an equally disappointing situation for the fans of that weapon. And sometimes a design is so fundamentally flawed you can't nerf the problems away. And reworking might make something better, but it doesn't always make it good, like with the Darwin's Danger Shield. While we know now that a lot of the more experimental unlocks did work out and make the game a lot better, like with the gunboats, the core designs of TF2's characters were not in any way bad, and sticking to the script isn't a terrible idea. It's certainly not the more fun option, but considering the amount of effort that Valve was willing to put into TF2 fluctuated throughout its life, like it was, you know, there but not extremely high early on, I would say, and then like in 2009 to 2012 it's really high. Like 07, 08 there's really not much, but then I think they learned, you know, what they can do with updates. But then especially after like 2014, and this is something you can even see firsthand sources at the Times discussing, Valve's involvement with the game really cratered, which is great because that's around the time they also decided to completely redo the entire matchmaker of the game. And considering Valve gave less and less of a shit about this game as time went on, and even when they really cared about it and were putting their whole ass into the project, they were not particularly good at solving issues with any level of speed. Like the OG Darwin's Danger Shield that was basically an automatic necessary pick if the enemy team also had a sniper took 7 years to get reworked into, you know, what we have now, which isn't even good. And again, while it's not the exciting option, I think it's generally better to have played it safe. Especially considering we're at the point where TF2 is more or less at its end-of-life phase when it comes to, like, actual balance, like maybe some bug fixes might come along that have a functional implication, and we're better off avoiding really annoying weapons that will never get fixed again, at the cost of maybe not attaining certain amounts of potential. But also, Eric, if you're listening, add the mini dispenser.